And welcome to Forum 360 on PBS Western Reserve, the Fusion Channel, your public TV stations, and Rubber City Radio, the Hudson Community TV, and the Rubber City radio stations where you can hear the audio. But today we have a visual, and we're hoping that we get to see everything here. Today, I will have a guest on that is Mr. Jim Ascherl. Jim Ascherl is an artist. He is a specialized artist, and we're studying a particular art today. Oftentimes on PBS Western Reserve, we see art programs, and we are going to be talking to Mr. Jim Ascherl. Jim Ascherl is the proprietor of Ascherl Studios. It is a stained glass and leaded glass studio. Oftentimes we go past churches, synagogues, buildings, older buildings, and we see the specialty of the stained glass culture. Going back into the Middle Ages, and Jim will be talking to us a little bit about that. Hello, Jim, and welcome.
Hi, Bill. How are you?
I'm trying to find out a little bit about how your family, you're the third generation that started this art and craft. How did your family, the Ascherls, get started in stained glass, a beautiful type of art?
So my grandfather started in Germany, really about when he was 13 years old. He got sent, he was finished with school, age 13, and he wandered into a glass shop, a commercial glass shop actually, that made clear storefront windows. And he worked there for about 3 years, became an apprentice. And then after the 3 years, he ended up being a journeyman. And shortly after that, he told his boss he wanted to learn stained glass. And his boss told him, "You're too old to learn a new trade." Well, that didn't satisfy him. He worked for him for another 6 months, maybe even up to a year, and he quit, which was unheard of back in those days. You pretty much your career was established once you made a journeyman. But he quit, and he wandered into a little stained glass studio in southern Germany, and he didn't know stained glass, but he knew enough about glass that they took a chance with him, and there he flourished at it. He actually walked from town to town in Germany fixing leaded glass windows. After a number of years, he decided to come over to the United States, landed at Ellis Island. That was the rage back then. Everybody wanted to come to the United States. So he got a job. He landed in New York, Ellis Island, got a job as a baker, which had nothing to do with stained glass, but he needed a job. And he married my grandmother, and she had her three kids, including my dad. And after a few years of living in New York City, one of his friends told him he needed to come down to Cleveland. Of course, Cleveland was about 10 years behind New York City as far as development, and there was just a lot of opportunity. So he moved to Cleveland, Ohio. He got a job in another commercial glass shop, Lorraine Glass Company. So they were headquartered in Lorain, Ohio, and they had a satellite office in Cleveland. So again, it was better than being a baker, but it wasn't quite stained glass. So he took the job, and if you're familiar with the history of Greater Cleveland, in 1924, a tornado, still one of the most devastating tornadoes, I think, in U.S. history, wiped out downtown Lorain. And Lorraine Glass Company, the headquarters, was getting just inundated with repair work along with the new work they were trying to do, and including all the church work. And they didn't really want to do the church work, but somebody in the Lorraine Glass shop said, "Hey, doesn't Michael Ascherl at the Cleveland office know stained glass?" They called down there and said, send him up. Well, in 1924, you didn't commute from Cleveland to Akron. So he packed up his family and packed the bags and moved to Lorraine. He built a little house in Sheffield Lake area and went to work fixing all the windows. And it took them 4 years, him and another kid that they took out of the shop, took 4 years for them to repair all the stained glass in the churches in Lorraine. At that time, the boss said, time to go back to the commercial work, which was flourishing. And my grandfather said, you know what, I think I'll take a stab at it on my own. So in 1928 was officially the start of the business.
And Ascherl Studios is, by virtue of your family's history, the oldest studio that specializes in stained and leaded glass. So it is in Northeast Ohio, Northern Ohio, is probably one of the most highly commissioned from jobs. So some of the jobs and some of the art the crafts that you have to work on, what are some of the typical, we have synagogues, churches, office buildings. I can imagine you've been to several of these types of jobs. So step by step, before you even go back to the studio to fashion the glasswork, what are some of the things you speak to your clients about?
Well, I mean, certainly we've worked on every possible. I mean, I've walked into churches, gone up into the steeples, and seen where my grandfather had carved his initials in the wood where he had been repairing the windows. So we've just been all over, everything from the Old Stone Church in downtown Cleveland to Cleveland Zoo. We've done new work for the Cleveland Zoo years back. But when you talk to a client, I mean, obviously reputation is huge. And, you know, I think when it comes to the restoration and repair work, most common people, I guess, don't know really how bad sometimes a window is. You know, they've been up for 100 years in a church. They got a couple broken pieces. Well, there's usually more damage than that. And of course, trying to maintain the authenticity of that window is a difficult task. So.
Absolutely. Now, Jim Ascherl, if you could talk about an example of a world, because we are a program that looks at a global outlook and take the local view. Spring of 2019, all over the major news networks around the world, all the American networks and the BBC and Reuters, you saw the Notre Dame Cathedral of Paris destroyed. And this must have inspired a lot of when the country of France decided they need to rebuild that great heritage, great building. This, obviously you and some of your colleagues probably said this is an opportunity, not
Sure.
just for people there, but others would be called in for a type of job like that.
Sure. And one of the unfortunate things for me is there's just a host of extremely talented studios throughout Europe. I mean, essentially Germany, England, Italy, all of those were well known for their stained glass. Almost all the studios here in the United States have some roots that go back to Europe, and there's just a host of, you know, really capable studios. So for them to call me up or one of my colleagues here and want to fly us out to, you know, Europe to repair them is probably not going to happen. But I'd love the opportunity.
But you've had enough opportunities here with the fact that we have tornadoes, we have windstorms, so many synagogues, churches, and buildings have probably had to been repaired. And like you said, you go back for maintenance. You're the third generation craftsman, and your grandfather and your father probably worked on. So you go back and you see, like you said, you see the old existing windows that need to be repaired.
Yeah.
Question about the non-heritage style, where you're not looking at historical buildings, but people for commercial buildings. You're seeing more and more stained glass usage.
Yeah, there's definitely been, you know, an upswing in in commercial and specifically residential. And I've been doing this well, I've been doing it since I was a little kid, but I took over the business in 1994 from my dad, and I watched residential work really skyrocket, and that comes a lot with the typical home that used to have one bathroom in it, and there was a window at the end of the bathroom, and the tub and shower were shared together, kind of thing. Those types of homes are long gone now. There's a separate shower, separate tub. There's 10-foot ceilings, vaulted ceilings, so you've got a lot of unusual shaped windows that you can't put a normal treatment on. So residential has always, or has recently, I should say, within the last 20 years, really skyrocketed. I'm constantly doing entryways, cabinet doors, bathroom windows. And clearly, like I said, now they have a separate tub and shower, so now there's a window, and people want to sit in their tub and look out their window, and then they realize, well, everybody can look in. So what's the option? Hang curtains or maybe get a stained glass window. So we do a lot of that. But commercial-wise, absolutely. Commercial work is always, at least since I've been doing it, it's always been pretty steady. I think they see the uptrend in people making their businesses try and look very professional and want that little extra thing to make their business stand out. People put a lot of money. I mean, if you walk into foyers of some big businesses, and they look beautiful. They look like a expensive hotel or something. Certainly, stained glass is one of the ways to accomplish that.
Ironically, your grandfather, when he came from southern Germany and was trained as a journeyman and learned the trade and came to the United States and really got involved in repairing windows and stained glass work. He got involved in a company called the J. Gross Company, which was making, that was a company that he would, in Germany, pick up kind of trade items, and they would make interesting covers and toolboxes. And so when he came to this country and he taught your dad, John,
Yep.
and Michael, the two, started working together. They first called it Sunset Studios.
That's
And
correct.
if people go to the website, AscherlStudios.com, we'll put up the website here on Forum 360. They can see the history. And it went from Sunset Studios, and then obviously you would be proud of the fact that they took your name. Yeah. And made it Ascherl Studios. That transition started. So in 1967, your dad took over,
right,
and from your grandfather, and Hinckley, Ohio, became the location, kind of central between Akron, Cleveland, Lorain, and so by the 1980s, you started seeing more demand. The industry was catching on, and then you took over, Jim Ascherl. Tell us a little bit how you got involved.
Well, my dad had always kept the studio small. We didn't have a lot of employees. I really didn't want to work for my dad. I'd been making little items and working with my dad as he needed me, but I really didn't want to work for my dad. And in 1994, I want to say I was somewhere mid-20s. And I thought, you know what, I should give this a go. And I did, work hand in hand with him for many, many years, till 2007 when he passed away. 2010. And he literally, he passed away two days after Christmas. And he was here working in the studio 2 days before Christmas at age 85. So actually, I take that back. He was 89.
You assumed the family tradition. Let me say that we are in a program talking about art. We're talking specifically about the craft of glass with leaded or colored glass. And we are going to be talking still for a few more minutes with Jim Ascherl. We're taking a topic with a global outlook, a local view. I'm your host, Bill Steven Saus. And we are on PBS, Western Reserve Public Television, the Fusion Channel. Hudson Community TV, our host studio, and we are heard on the Rubber City radio stations. Again, our topic, the global outlook, is stained glass, colored glass. Interesting that your dad got to go back to Germany by virtue of the fact during World War II, he was drafted and got involved in the United States Army, went in during the Battle of the Bulge, went to Germany during that war. And he got to see probably a lot of cathedrals, a lot of buildings where the glass was certainly damaged, but he at least got to see some of that style that your grandfather saw originally in Europe. But a World War II vet, we're thankful that he did serve, and proudly, and then he came back and was able to take over his father's business, and now you're third generation. Presently, you moved into a nice studio. You're right in the studio there, and it's a 4,000-foot facility. It permits a lot of activity. You can come in and work. What are some of the tools you're using? You're talking about back in the early days, they would use diamond cutters for glass. What are some of the more modern ways craftsmen such as yourself are using stained glass?
The tools themselves haven't changed a lot. The same basic tools are still used, but all of them have a little bit different. Like you mentioned, the diamond cutter. I think I showed you one that we have a little diamond tip in it. Those aren't used anymore now. They're hardened steel wheel, usually oil lubricated glass cutter. It's held just like a pencil in a sense. The other major tool you need is a soldering iron. And back in my grandfather's day, they would take the soldering iron and stick it in the coals, and they get it nice and hot, and that's how they solder with it. Well, of course, now we use electric ones. So, and really, other than an electric grinder, which we don't use that often, but we do have it available, the only other tool, the big one, is the kiln. And I know we didn't really touch on the difference between stained and leaded glass, but everybody kind of calls it all stained glass. True stained glass is glass that it can be colored already, that is painted on and then fired in a kiln. So a kiln is an important tool for a stained glass studio, but not a lot of stained glass studios really do stained glass, they just do leaded glass. So we use a kiln pretty frequently. And back in the day, those were coal fired, very inefficient, but that's what they had to deal with. And now we use electric kilns. So the kiln, soldering iron, and glass cutter, and there's some glass pliers, those have never really changed. So the tools themselves stay the same. So.
Very good. Now, going back to the global outlook, historically, it started back in the Middle Ages. Talking to you before the program began, we learned that the not so wealthy in Europe were using the pieces of glass, putting them together with the lead, and they were able to at least fashion some type of decorative glass for their smaller homes. And then you said that when the folks with more money and the religious organizations and the palaces of the aristocracy and the castles, they decided, let's take advantage, let's start using these craftsmen to build beautiful, larger windows, right?
Right. So exactly, because when glass was first developed, it was extremely expensive to make a small, very small size of a letter sheet of paper was a very expensive process. And so only the wealthy people, if you had a window that was 8.5 by 11 in your front door, you were extremely wealthy. So yes, before peasants would hang out at the glass shop, the only way they could have a window of any size was to let it together. So the first leaded glass windows were owned by the poor people. And as glass rapidly became efficient and more cost effective to make, it became cheaper. The average person could afford it. At that time, the wealthy people, like you mentioned, the palaces and the wealthy individuals saw the leaded glass and they saw the beautiful, intricate detail, and they wanted that. So, but the first leaded glass windows were actually made by the poor people, and the rich people had the plain piece of glass. So.
Yes. Now, if you go to your website, AscherlStudios.com, you can see some of the art that you've done for some of the religious buildings, uh, places of worship, where you see, I saw one, Michael the Archangel. We see the lion, the tribe of Judah. We see uh, different types of religious art. How long does it take you once you, once they say the clergy says, "Here's what we'd like, Jim. We'd like this figure." You obviously have to look at, go into some historical books, some religious books, some art books. So that must take some time. Tell us about the preparation. We have about
Well, yeah, once you meet with them and kind of decide on what you want, you have to draw the full scale cartoons, and there's some actually hanging behind you there. Some cartoons that to work off of working drawings. That takes 10, 15, 20, 40 hours sometimes to draw the correct cartoon. Once that's approved and you pick out the glass, you've got another 20, 30 hours cutting glass, then you've got 20, 30 hours painting the glass. So, and it depends on the size of the window, obviously. With the, bigger the window, generally, the more it takes. But all the painting, and then you got to fire it in the kiln, then you got to trim it, fit it into the lead, and put the window together. So you can have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours just in one, high quality window. So
it seems government buildings are doing the same. You see the flags. You go into some of the larger government buildings, state and national. You see these beautiful glass, stained glass items on, and they might show a character of a former governor or an early pioneer or a Native American that was involved in some type of historical piece.
right.
And I'm seeing more and more wherever I go. Universities, you go on campuses throughout the country, and you see stained glass artists working, putting in their glass still.
Yep.
It doesn't seem to ever wane away. It's growing.
Yeah, and and most people don't know the value. Sometimes I just did the entire church. I did storm protection on a church south of here. I just finished the job up. They literally had, and I didn't give them an actual appraisal, but they probably had somewhere around $500,000 worth of stained glass, really high quality work. When they were giving me all the information, the history, because the windows weren't signed and I didn't know the history of it, they had paid $1,700 for all of the stained glass in that church, and it's literally worth, well over $500,000. The return on the investment was amazing, but a lot of people don't really even appreciate the value sometimes.
I mean, it's architects to this day, when they're commissioned, they're probably going to tell the client, whether it be a church, synagogue, or a government building, that eventually, if you want to brighten up this room or this facility, this building, this edifice, contact a stained glass craftsman. And so that's why it's so important to know people such as yourself. If people are interested, of course, go to the website AscherlStudios.com. That's Ascherl, ASCHERL Studios.com. And we appreciate your sharing this third generation of art with us, that you've been involved for your family for 3 generations, passed down. And that's one of those rare yet wonderful items when family can pass down an art, an apprentice, and become a journeyman. Jim, I appreciate your involvement.
Yep.
Thank you for being a part of our program. This is Forum 360. Again, I'm your host, Bill Steven Saus, and we appreciate your watching and listening to this program, Global Outlook, Local View. We are talking about the art, which is very historical, from the Middle Ages all the way now to the 21st century. Stained glass. You can almost go to any old building, colleges, universities, and churches and see stained glass. And we were able to talk to an artist doing that right now in today's world. Again, thank you for being a part of our program today.
Forum 360 is brought to you by John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, the Akron Community Foundation, Hudson Community Television, the Rubber City Radio Group, Shaw Jewish Community Center of Akron, Blue Green, Electric Impulse Communications, and Forum 360 supporters.